This is Madeline Jarvis.
And I'm Renee Greenlee.
Today is May 12th, 2021, and we are in Marion City Hall in Marion, Iowa. Nick, could you please identify yourself?
I'm Nick AbouAssaly.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And we spoke before we got on record as well about how you would like to be publicly referred, and you said that first name is fine, first last name, whatever feels comfortable.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. And then as well, we spoke about a Readers Theater event with Giving Tree Theater on August 10th. Would you be willing to potentially have your interview introduced or performed by a member of that cast?
Yes.
Thank you.
If it's of interest to people, it's fine with me.
Thanks so much. So let's just hop in with some of the questions that staff had identified, knowing that, again, as we spoke off record, that you'd be willing to continue on with conversations that are more relevant to your specific unique role as the mayor of Marion during this difficult time.
Sure.
So as I kind of alluded, could you walk us through your connection to Marion, Iowa?
Well, I grew up in Marion. I moved here in 1975, graduated from high school, and went to college and went to work in another state for a few years, and then came back and got married, and I'm raising my family here with my wife, and have been involved in all things Marion for many, many years, since returning here as a young professional. And I'm not so young anymore, but have been involved in every aspect of community life and community development and economic development. And in 2013, I applied to fill a vacancy on the city council and was appointed for a 6-month remainder of a term, and then ran again for the position that fall, and 2 years later ran for mayor, and I'm now in the second year of my second term as mayor of Marion.
That's fantastic. You must have seen so much growth in Marion. I was going to say since 2015, but 2013, 1972, all the way back.
Definitely a lot of growth. When we moved to Marion, there was our little neighborhood with 8 houses on the street, and everything around us was cornfields. And then there was this Linmar High School, the Linmar School complex up the street, and now, it's all houses all around us. It's been incredible, the growth and the changes since we moved to Marion, and it's certainly since I became involved on the city council. It's just the growth has been tremendous. So I believe the city is adding 500 to 600 people a year. It's one of the fastest growing cities in the state of Iowa. Currently the 14th largest city in Iowa. So it's been fun to see Marion grow and provide more and more opportunities for people to have a good quality of life here, and it's attracting more people to come here. So it's been fun to be part of that.
For sure. Yeah. So taking a step back, let's think back on Monday, August 10th. So the day of the Derecho. Could you tell us a little bit about how your day started, what your day looked like?
Sure. That day will always be etched in my mind, and I think in most people's minds. I went to work, and I recall my wife, who she's my weather person. I always ask her in the morning, "What's the weather going to be like today?" Because she stays on top of all that and sees the forecast. And she says, "Well, looks like there's a strong storm that's going to be coming." So I thought, well, that's just her, because she's always concerned about the weather, and so I didn't really think much of it. And I went to work that day. And it was just a normal day all morning, and then she called me later and she said, there are reports in Des Moines that there's a lot of wind with this storm and it's coming this way. And I said, oh well, maybe just bring in the cushions from the patio furniture. There's a couple planters that I said just put them up close to the house so that they don't blow over. and should be fine. So later that day, as the storm started to come, you know, and I work on the 10th floor of a 12-story building, and you know, I could see the clouds coming. It was just getting darker and darker, and I was on the phone with someone in Iowa City for work, and we were talking, and it's just, I was looking out the window, and it just, all of a sudden it was just so dark out, you know, pitch black, you know, like, and I said to him, I said, boy, it's very dark here. How is it down in Iowa City? And then the call got cut off, the electricity shut off, and so we were all asked to go to the basement of the building, and so we all took the stairs down to the basement from the 10th floor, and we were down there with all the other workers in that building. And you know, again, you just think, oh, this will blow over. We've had windstorms before, and you think, you know, it'll blow over. First we stood in the lobby of the building, and then I started seeing things blowing around, like pieces of the buildings, you know, just flying off of the buildings. And so I decided, I don't know why, to go upstairs to the skywalk to get a better look. So I went up to the skywalk, and the security guard for the building was standing in the skywalk, because it's all glass, and you're looking out with another person there, a woman. And I said, you all might want to leave this area. Well, I'm glad they did, because you know, 10 minutes later, all of that glass crashed down, because things were hitting the glass. Pieces of the buildings, like I said, or whatever was flying around, was hitting the glass, and all that glass just shattered that whole skywalk. It's still not repaired and locked today. But anyway, so we all realized how bad it was, and everybody got down to the basement. And again, you think it's going to pass in about 10 minutes, it'll be gone, because most of those strong storms usually blow through pretty quickly. You know, they're usually 10 minutes and it's done. But 40 minutes later, it was still going, and that was the most shocking thing. And that's when you start to realize, wow, this could really cause a lot of damage, because it's just not letting up. You know, for 40 minutes straight, sustained heavy winds, and you know. You start to wonder, you know, what kind of damage is it causing? Well, then my wife called on my cell phone, and she said, oh gosh, you know, there's water coming in everywhere, water coming in from the ceiling at the house. She was still working from home then, and the kids were all home. So, you know, so that added to my, you know, because I wanted to be there with them, and the kids were scared, and
here you are in downtown Cedar Rapids.
Downtown Cedar Rapids, I have no way to, you know, get out, or to, you know, to get home. You know, it just didn't feel safe to try to leave. And you know, water was coming in through all the windows on the west side of our house. And so I just said, you know, get to a safe spot, don't panic. And well, finally it let up, and so immediately I got in my car and tried to get home. Well, that was a real experience. Every way I tried to get to Marion was blocked, either with heavy traffic, or down power lines, or trees blocking the road. It was quite a scene, and I don't know if you were in a place where you had to travel back home, but you know, it was almost impossible to get into Marion. It took me probably an hour and a half or more. I finally decided to go up Highway 380 to County Home Road. Or first I tried to get in through Hiawatha, and all those routes were blocked. Boyson Road was heavy traffic. I went to Robbins Road, and there were down power lines, so they were making everyone turn around. I took another route, and I, you know, squeezed under some down power lines to get through, and then got up to County Home Road, and you know, again, all the Albernet Road was blocked with power lines, 10th Street, C Avenue. Finally got to Winslow Road that goes into Hunter's Ridge, and was able to come down that way, and I came home. So my initial experience was I didn't see the devastation in this part of in the older part of the city, the
Right.
uptown and the older part, because I live in the northern part of the city, and those are mostly newer neighborhoods, so there's not a lot of mature trees there. But anyway, so I didn't see a lot of the damage in the city, having come in from the north entrance to the city. So, but I got home, and it was quite a sight. It was really, really shocking. I was really speechless. I just couldn't even say anything. And our family came apart. Some of our family came over, and I just couldn't even really talk. It was just like you look at your house, and all of the siding had been sheared off on the north and south sides of the house, because it's wide open and there aren't mature trees. All the siding on the north and south sides of the house was just sheared completely off. There was roof damage. Our lawn furniture and our deck furniture had flown up over 2 stories, 3 stories over the house, and landed in the backyards of our neighbors across the street in pieces. So kind of, I was just started gathering stuff, all the debris, the siding and the pieces of furniture, and kind of assessing everything. The house inside, the leaking had stopped. But I guess there was still some leaking, and so we were trying to clean some things up and move furniture around and things like that. But that was the initial experience. Once I kind of, we got things under control there, then I decided to take a look at what's happening in the rest of the city, and that's what I was truly speechless. It was so heartbreaking.
What time did you leave your house? Do you remember?
I don't remember. It probably was, later that evening.
Still
early.
light out.
Yeah. Oh, it was kind of dusk.
Sure.
It was just starting to get dark, and it was a very surreal experience. I drove down 10th Street, and started to see the trees, as I got closer to where the mature trees are in town. Started to see how many trees were down, and then I drove by the Granger house, and I saw the roof completely gone, and that's when you realize, oh man, this is really a bad storm. And then as I got closer into Uptown, you see the Wits End building with the roof missing, and you see Scott's, and then the Heritage Center with the big hole in the roof, and I still remember all those images. And then I tried to drive through the neighborhoods south of Uptown, and people were already out trying to clear the streets, and of course the city crews were out trying to clear the streets so that the emergency vehicles could get through and get to people. But there were also lots of people that had come out of their homes and were helping each other and starting to clear a path through the streets. But this, there was barely a path that you could drive through, just with one car on most of the streets. But it was such a surreal experience. And then as I did that, I felt this huge kind of weight, coming upon me, just the feeling of the immense nature of this task of where do we even start? And the thing about it was, it's not like with a tornado where you have it goes through a certain area and then everyone else can come and help.
Right.
We were all affected. Every part of the city was affected. Every house was impacted. Every building, every family was impacted. So everybody needed help at the same time, and that to me was the most overwhelming part of it. It seemed so overwhelming, and you couldn't help it, but I mean, it just brought tears to my eyes to see the destruction, and to see the extent, the extent of the damage. Um, so I think we were so lucky that we didn't lose any lives in Marion. Um, and generally in the area, I believe there was one life that was lost. There was a man who was on a trail at the time, and lost his life, unfortunately. But it kind of miraculous that we did lose more lives. We were very, very blessed and lucky.
Absolutely. During that first drive-through that evening, was there anybody who you saw that you spoke with, or were you still gathering your thoughts as you were assessing damage?
Well, the first thing I did was call the city manager.
Yeah.
And I don't recall exactly what time or when I did that, but and of course he had his own damage in his house, and he was on the roof trying to secure his house. So it just kind of started making calls to people to see what we should be doing. But eventually, and this is where it gets a little fuzzy, it was the next morning. I drove out to, I think, so what the city manager said was the crews are out trying to clear the streets. We're trying to, just make sure that emergency vehicles and the first responders could get to all the people. That was our first, our priority task, was to make sure that people who needed help, that first responders and emergency vehicles could get through to get to them, to provide them with the help. Early the next morning, I went to the fire station just to try to start to organize, and talked to the fire chief. Was just arriving, and we talked, and we talked to the city manager, and then we started kind of putting our plan together after that initial phase of making sure that the emergencies were handled. So, there was no electricity at City Hall.
Right.
There was, phones were very, the cell phones were even very spotty. I remember I was driving all over town trying to find a spot where my cell phone would work, and I found a spot by the police station. And so I was going out there and getting my texts, and,
Yes.
or, and trying to message people, and, so then Lau Park had a generator. So that seemed like the logical place that we could go and organize and start to put a plan together. So I went to Lau Park, and Jill Ackerman, the chamber president, showed up there and said, "Okay, what do you need from me?" And that was sort of, it was as heartbreaking as it was, and as overwhelming as it was, that attitude of "where do you need me?" just kept coming up over and over and over again, and that just made things a little bit easier to have people who just came and just rolled up their sleeves and said, "What do you need?" So immediately, this we didn't really say, "Okay, this is how it's going to happen." We just started working, and so it just the way it worked out was Jill and I were managing the humanitarian side of it. The city manager and the city team were managing the physical side of it and the cleanup. Of course, then the fire department, the police department were responding to people. But we decided right there, as we were standing in the Lau Park facility, that we should set up a hotline for people to call if they need help. We should set up a hotline for people who want to help and try to match them up. I called Grant Harper, city council member, and I said, "Would you organize a neighborhood canvassing team?" So that, because people don't have an ability to communicate, or they may not, they may be elderly, whatever it is, we need to go to them and see what they need. And so we put out a call on social media for volunteers, and people started showing up for the next 5-6 days, I think. People just showed up at 9 o'clock at Law Park. And Grant had organized how the teams would go out, on the map, on the city map, and so he, identified sectors of the neighborhoods of the city, and sent out teams to walk through the neighborhood, and whoever they saw, what do you need? How can we help you? And they brought back the list after they finished their canvassing, and then we would take that list and match it up with the needs. And the library staff was very helpful that first week in manning those phone lines, taking the calls from people who needed help and people who wanted to offer to help. And then we had Brooke Prouty take that over at some point, and then she started matching up the needs with a volunteer. And so I thought that worked very well. I think people in a time of crisis, they want to know that you care and that they're not forgotten. And to me, that was like the most important part of the response, was even though we couldn't possibly get to everybody, and we couldn't possibly do everything for everyone, it was important to me that they knew that we hadn't forgotten them, that they mattered, and that we were trying. And I think that goes a long ways, and we really, did our best to try to reach every person with a need, not only with those with the canvassing and matching up the volunteers, but we decided that we needed to try every avenue of giving people an opportunity or the ability to get information and to ask for help. So we set up booths with people stationed in them, and again, I think the library staff was helping with that. We put a booth here at City Hall, and one at Walmart, and one at Hy-Vee. And there were several at Thomas Park, and they kind of moved around. But it allowed people a chance to talk to a person in person, because naturally people would come to City Hall if they had questions or needed information and didn't have a phone or a way to communicate electronically. So I thought that was helpful. The other thing that we did was almost immediately we started getting calls from different cities, different towns, saying we want to send food, we want to send money, we want to send help. So I think it was immediately on that first day, the chamber set up an account for donations, and we started sharing that on social media. At the same time, we decided that we needed to have a food bank for people to come and get food, and the Churches of Marion Food Bank, we called them, and they said, well, we have down power lines all around our building, it's not safe, and it's also not easy to find that, it's kind of tucked away off of the main street. We wanted a place that everyone could easily locate, and we called the owners of the Marion Square Mall, which was largely empty, as it was being prepared to be redeveloped. So there were, that was my immediate thought, was what about that space there? It's central, it's on the main street, it's easily identifiable. And so Jill said, well, we can call them. And she called, and immediately they said, here are the keys. You can use whatever space you want. And so we went to the Marion of Churches food pantry. I called for some volunteers, and we loaded up everything they had so we could have something to start with. And we brought it over to this other space, and we just went in there and started setting up this food pantry. Well, that alone, just over the next 2 weeks, was an amazing experience. And I don't know if you visited there during this time, but it was such a a source of not only the supplies, and we ended up having food and pet supplies and baby supplies and building materials, generators, gasoline. I mean, people were donating everything, and you could come there and just get just about anything you needed. Fresh, prepared food, because most people couldn't cook in their homes.
Right, and
For
your
those-
fridge was spoiled.
Right, everything in your fridge was spoiled, everything in the freezers was spoiled. People didn't have the ability to cook, except on a grill maybe. So it was interesting, because, you think about people who need food assistance, but this was everybody in town that needed food assistance. It wasn't just a subset of, a certain socioeconomic level, or, it was everybody. And so that became important. So we were getting prepared food donated, and almost daily trucks were arriving, and people were just showing up, and it was such a source of inspiration for me. It really made me feel good about our community. Even in this time of devastation, time of just really just disbelief at the magnitude of the destruction, that it brings out the best of people, and it really did. And if you remember at the time, there was a lot of disunity in our nation, with the political, with the election, coming up, and with the racial issues. It just seemed like it was such a divisive time. Even COVID, people who wanted us to shut down everything, or people who acted like it wasn't even a thing, and so there was just a lot of tension between people at the time in our nation in general. But it was just so refreshing and so heartwarming that, for that 2-week period, you didn't see any of that in Marion, at least. Everyone could just sort of put it all aside and came together around this shared goal of just getting each other through it. I was so proud of that. So proud of it just gave me hope for our community and humanity in general. That in a time when it really matters, people do, see what we all have in common, and they come together. It didn't matter who you were. We all had the same needs. We all had the same issues going on, and everybody pulled together. It was really, I don't want to say fun to be part of it, but it was really cool to be part of this massive unified effort on a citywide basis, community-wide, of everybody pulling together. We had just dozens and dozens of volunteers coming each day to help in that distribution center, and to unload trucks, and to watch when someone came, and a lot of people came, thousands of people came wanting help, to watch those volunteers, how they treated the people who needed the help, and just hugging them and showing them care and compassion. And what we were doing was, someone would come and say, well, they would take a box of food, and they'd say, well, my sister needs, we'd say, well, who else do you know? So we were trying to use that to get the food out and the assistance out, as widely and as fast as possible, by asking the people who were coming who else they could take a box for, whether it's their parents or their neighbor or their elderly neighbor or friend. And so we were loading up cars with these boxes of food. It wasn't just for the family that came, and they were helping us distribute. We also had people who came, groups that came and volunteered to take food into the neighborhoods and into especially the mobile home parks, which were hard hit. And I walked through every single mobile home park, handing out food. I was, it took all of us, I mean, I recall one lady that called and she had multiple health issues, and she was worried that her cell phone was gonna run out, and she didn't have electricity, she needed ice for her insulin. So, and she lives in South Marion, and so I ran over there with ice and food, and then I brought her cell phone back to the distribution center, charged it up for a few hours, and then took it back to her. So, I tried to be as hands-on as possible during that time to just, be useful, and I took 2 weeks off of work. I just didn't go to work for those 2 weeks. And at the same time, I was trying to help the city get as much assistance as possible.
Right.
So in my role as mayor, I was, had that role, as the lead city leader, to represent the city and to make sure that we were getting the assistance we needed. So, I was in constant contact with our legislators, and then finally, one of them said, "Here's the governor's phone number. Just call her." So I called the governor, and we asked for FEMA. Oh, no, I'm sorry, for the National Guard assistance, and the next day they showed up, and the governor ended up visiting here 3 times. So I was able to give her tours and show her what was going on, so she understood what our needs were. But and this is only, so now this is like the first 5 days, all of this. But I think by the 5th or 6th day, or maybe by early the next week, I think, we met at the police station with the city council and the disaster recovery company. Actually, it was the Friday of that first week. And we approved the contract with the cleanup company, and they started that very next Monday. So it was very quick. And they had their trucks here, and they started with the cleanup of the debris on Monday. At the same time, the National Guard came, again, by the end of that week, and they helped to clear the way for the line workers who were trying to fix the power lines. And they were also, and then by that time, the city had power back in City Hall, so we set up our command center in the council chambers. And that was, I think, that's when, we really started to make a difference, because it brought everybody together. All of the team was in one area, one place, one room, including the fire chief and the police chief and the city manager, and I mean everyone was assigned a task, and we also had the National Guard stationed there with us, and so there was no duplication of efforts. There was a quick response. There were meetings in the morning about what we were going to do that day. There was meetings at the end of the day about what's going to happen tomorrow, and when it was such a massive task, but I think we just started to look at it as one task at a time, one day at a time, and that made it seem more manageable. Because if you thought about the entire thing at the same time, it was just overwhelming.
Right.
And we just started to take it one piece at a time of how we're going to take care of this issue and take care of this issue, and assigned it to people. And our entire city team was just phenomenal during this period. I was just so proud of them. Everyone stepped up, and everyone had issues with their own homes, and they had their issues with their families, and trying to make sure that they were taken care of. But they still showed up here to make sure that our city's taken care of. And we continued providing services seamlessly to people,
Mhm.
all those essential services, even with everything that was going on. Another thing that um, was really important was we had people in the community as well as national organizations that came to provide prepared food.
Mhm.
And so we had um, throughout the community stations set up, where prepared food was being offered to neighborhoods and to, especially the mobile home parks and the large apartment complexes. I think that helped a lot, just it helped us to better serve people. So I was sort of the lead in coordinating all that, or coordinating with those entities and those people on where to set up and what the needs were. Um, uh, I don't know,
Yeah, and I feel like even if we would have all had power and reliable ways to contact people, that still would have been sophisticated communication. Because as you're talking about that first week,
yeah.
it wasn't until everybody was together in City Hall where I'm sure you felt that you were able to know that everybody was getting the message at the same time, the way phone systems were and everything.
Right. I mean, communications was just
Right.
so difficult, and it wasn't until we all got together like that you felt like, okay, we're all on the same page. Even though everyone was doing something and
Mhm.
working, but it just helped so much to have everybody in the same room. And of course we were always coordinating with the county emergency management and getting a direction from them as to, because they were, all the FEMA assistance and all that, and technically the National Guard was to have gone through them, through their processes. But I guess, my attitude was, I don't want to rely on anybody else. I mean, to be honest, and I don't want to wait for someone else to, we just took it all into our own hands.
Mhm.
So that's why, I just contacted the governor directly. I was contacting whoever I could, all our legislators, and they all were very helpful. All our local legislators were very helpful in getting us the connections and the assistance we needed from the state Homeland Security and from the governor's office, and just getting us the contacts that we needed. And then the president visited at the Cedar Rapids airport, so I had the opportunity to meet with him for about 45 minutes with a group of other local area leaders, and again there asked for the FEMA assistance, and his whole team was there, and the head of FEMA was there, and so we interacted with them and shared with them the needs and the importance of the assistance that was needed. The other thing that stands out in my mind was for that next couple of weeks, I spent a lot of time on social media. I mean, hours each day, and mostly, after, because I was out and about and doing
Right.
everything from 6, 7 in the morning until evening. So it was mostly in the evening and into the early hours of the morning that I was on social media, because I've always been engaged on social media with the community, but so people know that, right? So they were tagging me with questions, they were messaging me with questions, and so I really appreciated that opportunity to be able to provide direct information to people about where they can go for help, or what the resources are, or what the information is that they need. They might have a question of, what do we do in this case, or what do we do in that case? So being able to direct them for help or to provide information, or people were messaging me with, my neighbor. I mean, I had a lot of that. My elderly neighbors, need food, or my elderly neighbors are running out of insulin. So then I would take that information, get it to the fire chief or to whoever was, could help, and we were able to get direct help for people like that, especially, I mean, the medications and the insulin, and those were big issues for people. Oxygen, I had people contacting me from out of state. My parents or my mother, really needs oxygen, and so I kind of became the middle person.
Right.
But which I was happy to play that role if it helped people. And I think through all of these things, we were able to really get our community through that really difficult time period. And I'm sure we didn't reach everybody, and we weren't perfect, but I know that there were a lot of people that were served and helped. And if not, at least they knew that we were trying and that we cared. I went out to several mobile home parks and met with people, and just, if nothing else, gave them a hug and shook their hand and told them, we were trying and we tried to get help to them. I delivered with other people fresh, prepared food to every single mobile home park, and lots of apartment complexes, and just trying to show people that we're here and we didn't forget about you.
Yeah, earlier you mentioned that you were in constant contact, and that was a phrase that I was going to bring up, because every time I saw you in the month of August, you were on the go. You had your phone in your hand, you were talking to the governor, you were responding to a tag that somebody did to your personal Facebook page on a public Facebook group, and just treating everybody with that dignity, respect, and hearing out the questions. I remember seeing so often you would get tagged not with the question itself, but somebody would respond to another person's question and just tag your personal Facebook page.
Oh, yeah.
And say, I don't know, let's ask the mayor.
Yeah. And I didn't always have the answer, but I always at least responded with, I'll find out, and I'll see if I can find the answer for you. But I got a lot of private messages too, of just people saying, you should know about this issue, or I want to alert you to this problem, or, what's going on with this, and
So you're coordinating these humanitarian efforts basically when there's light outside, and then you go home and you're on your phone answering all these direct messages. I haven't mentioned anything about eating and sleeping.
That's overrated. I certainly wasn't the only one doing all that, right? So when there was a big team of us, the chamber staff, the Chamber of Commerce staff that worked at the and managed the distribution center, the city team that was working so hard, all the volunteers, we were all going on adrenaline, and so when you don't really think about that you're not sleeping enough or eating, or whatever it is. I mean, you're just trying to help as many people as possible, and the goal was to get our community through that period to a point where people could start to help themselves, and whatever needs they had, that they could get back on their feet, and it just, that's all you're thinking about, is just succeeding in that and helping people. So it was fine. I mean, looking back on it now, it seems like it was so overwhelming. But when when you're going through it, it seems overwhelming, but you don't really think about it much. You just, like I said, it was like, okay, what's next? What do we do now? What do we do? What do we have to take care of now? And then we got through it.
Speaking of getting through it and all the helpers, I'd love for you to tell us about I don't know even what to call them, the guys from Georgia.
Oh, yeah.
Talk to us about that crew that came up.
So I think they contacted Jill, and he was from Marion, and is a police officer in Georgia. And we had several of those kinds of people where they grew up in Marion, and they wanted to do something to help, wherever they live now. But he just started collecting money and food and supplies, and got a group together, and they just drove here, Um, and it was just meant so much to have them come that far. There was also a group from New England area that drove all night with supplies. A part of the crew from the USS Iowa submarine. And they stuck around for a while. They delivered the food and supplies that they had brought, and then went to help in another town, and then came back and helped as the National Guard was helping, and they helped clear debris, and they were in people's yards cleaning debris for a few days. And so we haven't even touched on that, the groups that came and volunteered to clear debris from people's yards and private property. That was really amazing. And there's still groups that are still doing that, so. But that group from Georgia, we kind of connected with them for some reason. They just, it just meant so much that they cared that much, to drive all that way with supplies, we actually had a lot of fun with them. While they were here, we took them out to dinner to thank them, and kind of connected with them. It was they were really caring people. They have to be to do that.
Absolutely. So I'm curious too. So we've talked about how you've been in just constant communication for that entire month and then some. Was there anything that you received when you were an elected official at first to talk about reaching out to elected officials for emergencies, or when it came time to contact the governor, you just kind of got her phone number and said, I know what we need and I know how to share it?
It was kind of instinct, I mean, I didn't have training for disaster. Maybe there should be. Maybe that's what comes out of this, is we should have, what do you do in a disaster? And, you don't really think about that magnitude of a disaster happening in your community. I had, over the past few years, I mean, when you're mayor, obviously, you think about the responsibility for the community. And I did have some moments over the past few years of thinking, because we did have one time, there was some kind of material that was dropped out of an airplane over a neighborhood, like a dust or something, and it covered everybody's cars and houses. And that made me think, well, what if there was, what would, I mean, I've thought about that several times, or if a tornado came through, what would we do? How would, and I always knew that our fire department, our fire chief, sort of, becomes the lead in a time of a emergency. But beyond that, I had, I hadn't thought about, you contact the governor or anything like that. But I think, at least with I'm just speaking for myself, kind of instinct kind of kicks in. You want to help people, you want to make sure everyone's okay, and you take on that responsibility, and you do what you have to. And my attitude was, we're not going to wait for someone to tell us what to do or to send help. We're going to take it into our own hands and achieve the outcome that we want.
To be fair, even if you had gone through some sort of training, nobody's thinking, what if there's a hurricane in the middle of Iowa?
Yeah, it's just not.
We didn't even have the
expect.
language, did we?
No.
I had never heard of a derecho until 2 days after the storm.
But of course, we learned a lot of new terms in the last year. COVID-19 wasn't part of my vocabulary, or Derecho definitely was not part of my vocabulary, or essential workers, or you could think of so many terms that just kind of became household terms that none of us ever really used previously. But yeah, I mean, it's the first time I had heard of a inland hurricane, and you don't expect that. Like I said, you think about what if a tornado comes through, but that's usually a narrow swath
Mhm.
that, tornadoes impact. And like I said, then there's, areas around it that are unaffected, and people can come and help the people who
Mhm.
were affected. And it's just different. So, like, for example, when the floods happened in Cedar Rapids, we weren't impacted here in Marion. We were all able to go down there, and
Mhm.
I canvassed neighborhoods and filled, took my family and we filled sandbags and all of that stuff, and like everyone else did. So we were okay and we were able to help. But this was different because every single person was
Mhm.
impacted. Every house
Right.
was impacted. So,
Speaking of your house and your family, let's go back to that. So you left your house that Monday night. You had kind of your pile of siding and your pile of lawn furniture.
in my front yard, yeah.
Right. Come home to a house full of a family but with no power. Um, Tell us about how that felt for your family and what it took to kind of reclaim your house. How long were you without electricity at home?
Um, we were probably longer than a lot of neighborhoods. Our neighborhood, for some reason, we got electricity and lost it several
Mhm.
times because the transformer blew out or something like that. But I think maybe on the second or third day, um, my sister-in-law, um, came from Burlington with a generator for us.
Oh, nice.
So because the generators around here that were for rental were all gone, and so that was a major change for us. It just made everything so much better that we had a generator and we could, So I was alternating, plugging in the refrigerator, plugging in the freezer, um, so. But it helped so much that kind of changed everything. We've got a little bit of normalcy back, having the generator to plug essentials into it. Charge our cell phones, and our neighbors' cell phones and whoever else needed it. But so we were lucky that we were able to get the generator. Um, but we learned how to cook on a grill,
Mhm.
um, and and the water heater also, if I remember. I think that needed electricity to work, so I was kind of alternating things, but um, we ended up having every room. So that we thought, I went up into the attic, of the house, and there was a little bit of water, but so I couldn't tell exactly how the water was coming down through the light fixtures, but it seemed to have been, no permanent damage or anything like that. And all the water that came in through the windows was cleaned up and seemed like everything was okay. Then we had my wife insisted that we have somebody look at the walls to make
Mhm.
sure. And we had one crew that came and they said, "Oh, it should be fine." And then she just had another group come. We have a friend who runs a disaster recovery company, a cleanup company, and she called him, and he said, "Well, we really should check the walls." And so they came with a big probe and they were probing, different areas, and were finding moisture. And so it turned out that, because the water came straight at the house and in through the windows, so every western facing wall in our house, which is, I think, like 8 different rooms in the house, the walls had to be torn out.
Oh my God.
And all the insulation, it was just soaking wet. So we had weeks of living in our house with everything being torn apart. So they just started. That was, and it was COVID, right? You know,
Right.
that was the biggest part. Was, you know, we had been isolating for all this time, and now all of a sudden we had all these people in our house.
Mm-hmm.
You
In
know,
your safe haven.
yeah, and so it was funny because I was taking the disinfecting wipes and wiping all the door handles every time. But like there was one time where one guy came in, and then all of a sudden it was like something out of a movie. Like just every 10 seconds, the door opened and another guy walked in. 10 seconds later, the door opened, another guy walked in. They were coming in through the front door in the garage. And all of a sudden, we had all these people in the house, like this whole crew of people, and they just started tearing apart the walls. And, that we finally, like, I asked them to just stop and leave because it was overwhelming.
Right.
Because we had been isolating, being so careful, sanitizing everything. And then all of a sudden you have all these people in your house. It was just, that was very, very overwhelming. And luckily we had the contractor that built our house 6 years ago contacted us and offered to do all the repairs, to have his crews do all the repairs. So that was we knew him, we were comfortable with him. And so over the next few weeks, he sent his crews over, and they, did all the insulation and did all the drywall work and painted and all that stuff and fixed the roof damage and the siding and all that. So that got all taken care of. But there was quite a bit of damage. But that experience with, how do you ask them to put a mask on? How do you,
Right.
Because
it's been 6 months at this point.
Yeah, and we were, heavy in the middle of the of the
Right.
isolation and the distancing and the COVID response. It's just so it was just a lot to have all those people in the house. We were always nervous about having people in the house, and because even our kids had been really good. They of staying home and not being around a lot of people and being very careful and all that. So, yeah.
How long did it take you guys to get your crew in the house, though? To get your contractor's crew in to do the repairs?
My memory's fuzzy on that. Probably I would say by November. I mean, because I think the siding was the one thing that waited, that they got everything done on the inside, but I think we were probably finished by November with the repairs. Yeah.
That's impressive.
So another really cool thing was, I had all that pile of debris in my yard, and a neighbor just showed up and said, "We're gonna load this up and take it to the landfill. You don't have to worry about it. You go take care of the city." So it's again just another example of how people in a time like that really just look for ways to help each other. It's kind of
Right.
nice,
To acknowledge what you're doing too.
Yeah.
As well, to say we're all in this together for that balance. That is huge.
Right.
So I feel like this is a question that has every answer but no answer as well. How has your life changed after the Derecho?
Oh wow. Well, I always loved this community, but I am like so proud of this community now, just because I think we had a different experience from what other communities experienced, and the way everyone pulled together. I mean, my love for this community, if it could get bigger, it just grew much more. But it's interesting because now every time there's any kind of wind, I get nervous, and same with my wife. So I guess in that sense, kind of I'm more. I used to be very kind of aloof about the weather. Like, oh, it's whatever's going to happen will happen, and and
Yeah.
I never really worried about it too much. I never really thought about it. I thought, whatever happens, I'm going to go to work and come home, and if there's a storm or whatever it is, but that's changed a lot in my life. I think I've also realized, where my strengths are as a person, and as a leader, and saw a lot of strengths in a lot of people around me.
Yeah.
I just have a different understanding now of what it's easy to lead in easy times, and Marion's had some pretty good successes over the last decade, and so I've just, in a time of real crisis, is when leadership really matters. So I've kind of just realized where my strengths are in terms of leadership, and it made me a better leader,
Mm-hmm.
for sure. It helped me realize what's important, and what people can accomplish when they work together. The importance of community, and how much we really need each other.
Yeah.
Sometimes we think, oh, we can rely on ourselves for everything,
Mm-hmm.
and an experience like that really exposes how much we need each other as a community,
Absolutely.
as people, and it helps you to see that no one's better than anyone, no one's different than anyone. In a time like that, we all have the same needs. And when I was handing out food, prepared food, cars were coming through and taking food. I saw a lot of people, that
Right.
I never would have, you never would have expected to see
Mm-hmm.
seeking food assistance, but it was a time when everybody needed it,
Mm-hmm. And I think that shows a lot of trust too, to not only be vulnerable enough to acknowledge the need, but also in a community like Marion, to reach out to your friends and neighbors and say, yes, I need this need, and I'm
Yeah.
able to accept it from you.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
And we serve people from the region. We had people come from Vinton.
Mhm.
We had people come from Southwest Cedar Rapids, and that it just grew and grew more every day as people, were finding out that there are these resources in Marion, and it was, it was very moving. It was a
Mhm.
very moving experience. We, the chamber used some of the money that was donated to buy just gift cards,
Mhm.
debit or whatever, the gift
Yeah.
cards that you could use at the grocery store or wherever, um, just the Visa gift cards. And so they gave me a stack of them, and I was just giving them to people as I determined they had need. And there was a woman that came to the distribution center, and it's just, I'll never forget it, because she just looked so distraught, and she was looking, so I noticed her, and I said, how can we help you? And we gave her a box of food, and I said, and she needed baby supplies, so we got baby supplies, together for her and everything. And then I took out one of those cards and I gave it to her, and she just broke down crying. And I'll just never forget that. It just it was a very touching moment, I guess. That we were able to provide that assistance to her. So then I gave her another card.
So how do you not?
Yeah.
That's great. Well, those are the questions that I have right now. Renee, do you have anything that you'd like to add for this part?
I don't think so. Anything I've thought of, you have answered very well. So,
Thank you.
yeah. It's been
So-
wonderful.
Well, this has been good for me because, a lot of that, what I'd shared, I don't think about it much. I
Right.
could have easily forgotten it, so it helped to refresh my memory on the whole experience,
That's great.
it's,
Yeah, I hear what you're saying about almost being in a derecho fog, where it's not until you start talking where you really are able to unpack and think about how full those days really were.
yeah, when you're in it, you're just going all the time and you're not really thinking about it. You're just trying to take care of things, take care of needs, and make sure everything's taken care of. But yeah, I haven't had a chance to really sit down and
Right.
unpack it all and think about it in the big picture like this in hindsight. So this is really really valuable for me.
Wonderful. Are there any other topics that you would like to unpack together?
Yeah. I think we've covered it. I think we've covered everything. The recovery is going to be long term.
Mhm.
I think the immediate recovery of the humanitarian needs. We really took care of that, and but there are still people all over who still have trees in their backyard, or or who are still fighting with their insurance company,
Mhm.
who need the assistance. By the way, we used the $70,000 in donations that came through the chamber. Put together a grant program where individuals could apply, as well as businesses, for a grant to help with some of the expenses. Because as it turned out, the insurance benefits would only cover a tree that was actually on the house. And but most people had a tree in their yard that cost $3,000 to remove, or if they were the
Right.
really big trees.
Or on your garage, or
Or,
your shed, or your fence.
And so, which is, yeah, I don't know why the differentiation like that, but so they were able to provide a lot of good grants to just people that needed the help that way, and then part of the money was given to Trees Forever for long-term recovery of the tree canopy, and then some of the money was given to the food bank to replenish their supplies. Because through that we realized there really is a lot of food insecurity. I know I talk about everybody had the same need and all that, but there were a lot of people who had permanent food insecurity, that was beyond the derecho. And, so it kind of helped expose that, and we had been talking about what do we do about really increasing what the food bank does here in Marion and providing additional services to people. I had another thought that I can't remember now, but that I thought another topic that I thought we should cover. I can't think of it now, but sorry.
No worries. I'm glad you brought up Trees Forever, thinking about
Oh, yeah.
all of the trees that have been given away to the community to
Yeah.
kind of-
So one of the really positive projects that came out of it was we had a high school group that is part of the Iowa Big program, decided they wanted to help their community, and so they called me and said, we really want to do this project where we have chainsaw artists come, and then we want to have and they make sculpture out of the tree debris, and then we want to have an auction, so we need help finding a location for the auction, and and so I really connected with them in terms of guiding them, to help make their project successful. But they did it all, and they were amazing. But so I said, I said, well, we can supply you with the trees. First, we were thinking about, how, because one of them works at a lawn care company. Said, well, we have equipment. I can go around and get trees. And said, well, I could probably put you in contact with the Parks Department or our public service department, and we've got lots of trees. They can set them aside for you. So they were able to provide them with the supplies of trees. And I put them in contact with the parks director, who got them the authorization to set it up in the city square. And then I put them in contact with Jill Ackerman at the chamber, who the Uptown organization had done the auction, the online auction for their fundraiser earlier in the year. And so she said to them, well, with COVID, you might want to rethink about having a physical event for an auction. Maybe why don't you do it online? And so, to me was a really cool process, because you had all of these community leaders, adults, who were partnering with these students and guiding them to help them make their project successful. But these students were just phenomenal. They organized everything. They found the chainsaw artists. They were here from morning until night for an entire week with the chainsaw artists. They figured out how to advertise it to the community on social media, and they put out. I had Amber Bissinger help them with writing a media release. So everyone shared their talent with them, or their ideas with them, and helped them to be able to pull it off and make it successful. And they were here with the chainsaw artists for that entire week, and did the auction online, and ended up raising $26,000. They were able to pay the chainsaw artists, so that helped artists, in a time when artists haven't been doing very well. And then they gave $15,000 to Trees Forever for trees. And we've been partnering with Trees Forever in various ways with tree giveaways. And the Monarch Research Project donated a lot of trees for a giveaway to the city employees, where people could sign up for 2 trees, and all they had to do was promise to take care of the trees. So we've had trees provided through various resources, but certainly Trees Forever will be our long-term partner in rebuilding that canopy. And that's, you ask how I've changed or whatever, through the experience. I think we all took our tree canopy for granted.
Sure.
We lived, I realize now we lived in an urban forest. I mean, you hear the term, but you don't really think about it. It really was an urban forest, and now when you look at, it's been impacted greatly, and it's, there's the trees that are left are all kind of tattered, and they hopefully they'll all come back and be able to regenerate. But we lost a lot of trees, and there were some parts of the older parts of the city, and parts of Cedar Rapids, where they were just, the tree canopy was so developed. The first time I drove down those streets, I really felt lost. It was a strange experience, I went there. My cousin lives in the north part of the city, and just outside the city limits, on North 10th Street, and they had they have a yard. They had a yard with very mature trees, some over 100 years old, and they lost 39 out of 43 of those mature trees. So the first time I went to take a look, I could not find the house, because I just didn't recognize it.
Right.
I'm so used to, I seriously had to walk around. I parked my car on the street and I was walking around, you know, and I've been to their house a lot of times.
Right.
I was like,
You
is
don't
this
need
their
to
house?
set your GPS for
Is
it.
this
you
the
know?
house?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you know, because I was just so used to identifying their house by their front yard and the trees in the yard,
Mm-hmm.
not having realized that until that moment, that's
Yeah.
how I identified their house. I couldn't identify their house, and I had to like really try. And I walked up to I think this is the one, and what a strange experience.
Right.
But then that makes you realize how important trees are, and you know, and just even for the habitat for the birds, you know. I mean, for a while after the storm, didn't hear a lot of birds. You know,
Right.
it was so many things about it, you know, changed.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
So.
I'm glad that you brought up the Iowa Big project as well, because that's kind of what we're trying to do with this oral history, is to reclaim the narrative, to say that yes, the Derecho is such a story of destruction, but it's also a story of kind of reclaiming and saying we are here and we are resilient, and
Oh,
things
yeah.
are going to be different, but we're different together.
You know, and a lot of people met their neighbors.
Yes.
You know, people were out helping each other and met their neighbors for the first time. I mean, you know, there was a silver lining, you know, in the whole thing. You don't want it to happen again,
Right.
but there were positives that came out of it. It drew the community together. It showed the best in people. It helped people realize, you know, that we really, you know, we all have the same things in common and have the same wants and needs. No matter who you are or what your background is or anything, you know, we're all the same. And it, you know, it's helped us realize what's important.
For sure.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again so much for giving your time and your perspective
Absolutely.
to our project. I agree that it's cathartic to talk through pieces, and we really appreciate your insight. Our next steps this week, I'll send you a transcription of our conversation if you'd like for your record, as well as the recording. And then as we get closer to the go live date of this website, as well as the project, we'll of course be in touch too.
Okay.
Cool, so thank you.
Thanks so much.
And you can breathe.